Hello and welcome to Dialogue. Last week, the Bagram Air Base in Kabul was vacated by the U.S. military, just one step closer to the complete withdrawal of American troops in Afghanistan ahead of a September 11th deadline. With only 10% of troops remaining to be evacuated, what will be the fate of this war-torn country after the removal of U.S. forces? Will Afghan government be able to hold back the Taliban, which has been gaining ground in the countryside? And how can we assess the nearly 20-year U.S. military occupation in Afghanistan? And to answer these questions, I'm joined here in the studio by He Wenping, Senior Research Fellow of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and by satellite from Memphis by Joseph Gregory Mahoney, Professor of Politics in East China Normal University, and from Kabul by Mushtaq Rahim, Peace Building and Development Practitioner and Researcher. That's our topic. I'm Zhou Yue. Let me start with you, Ms. He. The American withdrawal from Afghanistan, actually, it didn't start with Biden. Obama considered it, Trump wanted it, but it is Biden who put it off. Why him?
Yeah, I think to my understanding, because Biden has made very clear he is about to make like a Pacific, the India-Pacific as a focus, no longer like make all those Americans, those especially military forces all over other places. Now, because actually Obama, that is his boss before, Biden's boss before, made this pivot Asia strategy by his time. So, but you know, we all know with lots of other elements, and then this pivot Asia strategy has started, but not in a very good complementary, I think. So actually, so in order to implement it, this pivot Asia strategy, now Biden administration already made even a key position, that is Campbell. Mr. Campbell now is called the coordinator of this India-Pacific area. So he is the guy in charge of all those issues. So, and also we have noticed that those quarter called India, like Japan, Australia, in plus America, those 4 countries used to be a minister level, this kind of meeting, but now all of a sudden becoming a summit meeting. So it has been improved the level in a very dramatic way. So actually this kind of pour over the troops from Afghanistan, and also I think from Syria, from Iraqi, all move over, maybe come over to the Pacific. That's the part of this general strategy.
So it is in line with the strategy of Biden administration. But what about the timing, Mr. Mahoney? This has to happen before 9/11. There's any political considerations behind this timing?
I think there are 3 things to note. The first, obviously, is the symbolic value of the date, the 20th anniversary of the attacks on the United States on 9/11/2001, advanced by al-Qaeda, which was then based substantially in Afghanistan. The second is that it extends Trump's May 1 deadline, which had been criticized from many corners, especially Republicans, as rushed. And it gives Washington arguably more time for diplomacy and repositioning. But third, some suspect that it might correspond with a projected timeline associated with expected Taliban advances. In other words, that might be as long as the U.S. can stay before the country falls too much further into Taliban hands.
And Mr. Rahim, is it in line with the reality on the ground? Because in late June, U.S. President Joseph Biden met with Afghan leaders. He promised a sustained partnership even as U.S. ramp up its withdrawal. What about the Taliban forces? Are they making headways in many different districts in the country? And the key issue is, will the Afghan government, Afghanis government, hold back the military operations of the Taliban?
Well, a fortnight ago, the Taliban started a significant offensive in the countrysides of different parts of Afghanistan, and they took over some of the districts which have been contested even during the presence of the international forces in Afghanistan, even after that. So those districts which have already been in a fragile situation fell to the Taliban, and the common sense was that, or common understanding was that well, the Taliban are advancing at a lightning speed. They're taking over places and they're making advances. But then when the Afghan government went back on offensive and faced off with the Taliban in different parts of the country, we can see that they have been pushed back. I mean, the Taliban have been retreating back from those areas that they had taken over, which means that the Afghan government forces have been able to stand up to the challenge of the Taliban, and they have been able to push them back. In the meantime, the international community have been coming up. The EU and NATO have come up and said that they will continue their support for the Afghan government. But more particularly, the Biden administration, when they met with the Afghan President Ghani during his visit to Washington, particularly the Secretary of Defense, they came up strongly saying that they will support the Afghan security forces. This is a very strong signal being sent to the Taliban and to the people of Afghanistan, as well as the Afghan National Security Forces, that the international community, particularly the Americans, are there to support them, both in terms of logistics, but also politically. And this gives the Afghan government a sense of confidence in a bid to continue thwarting the Taliban challenges that have been mounted. The reports that are coming out from the areas where the Taliban dominated a couple of weeks back, one can see that they have been facing a lot of casualties due to the aerial bombardment that is taking place with the support of the Americans, where they have pledged to give more aerial support to the Afghan government. They will give more fighter jets to the Afghan forces. This gives a sense of a situation where the fighting, the equation will change.
Well, what about the political and the security threats that originally took the Americans in? Because the harboring of Al-Qaeda and Islamic State, some people say that might be a problem if Americans get out of Afghanistan. Will that be a concern, Mr. Rahim?
You see, in terms of fighting Al-Qaeda, there have never been very specific information coming out whether they have been really rooted. You know, back in September 2020, there was a report by the UN observers team where they said that, well, the Taliban continue to maintain their ties with the Al-Qaeda. And of course, a few days ago, we had another report coming from the western part of the country where the report said that some of the Al-Qaeda members were targeted. This means they continue to operate from here. In the north of the country, we have reports where we have ETM elements and Chechen fighters who have taken sanctuaries in Afghanistan and who have been here partnering with the Taliban. They have been shown as to be fighting alongside the Taliban. This means we still have the threat present in Afghanistan, and it depends very much on the stability of the country. If the country slides further into chaos and instability, there is every possibility that those elements which are not able to operate from their actual sanctuaries, from their own countries, they will try to amalgamate, come together here in Afghanistan, and then make headways in different parts of the country, particularly the groups that are challenging the state in the Central Asian countries. So, you know, no specifics are coming out, but no one can deny the fact that there are still elements which harbor international militancy, and they continue to operate from within Afghanistan. Alongside the Taliban, they're fighting the Afghan government, and they will continue to remain here. So that challenge still is there.
The challenge is also a big one for Ghani's government, Ms. He. How capable is Ghani's government in Afghanistan? Will it be able to push for a political solution in the problem by reaching out to Taliban?
Well, I have noticed that because right now we have seen a very severe battle between the Afghanistan security forces and with Taliban. But actually, just 2 days ago, I heard that Taliban even made like a negotiation, this kind of plan. Now it's ready to talk with Afghanistan government. So which means it's not to say that some observers before they are thinking Taliban now has just want to go all the way from the rural area, maybe go to take over all those big cities, and then they will in charge of all the situation in the Afghanistan. There's no room for the Afghanistan government. So it's not that case because it's not that easy for Taliban to wipe out all those Afghanistan security forces. So eventually they need to talk. But now the fighting is trying to get more bargaining chips in their hands. So Taliban now occupying as many as 50 districts right now. So seems very aggressive now the thing. But another move that is Turkey forces now also moved in. Now they back with Afghanistan government. They have already offered suggesting to the Americans, saying, now we would like to get in and then to make security of this airport, Kabul airport. Now this is in their charge. They volunteer to do that. So they want to make this move in exchange for all those financial support and intelligence support and also the Air Force support from the White House. And then the Biden say, all right, that's a good idea. So your guys move in and then to make secure of this airport. Because this airport, if it gets secured, guaranteed, that also benefit for the United States, for their troops in and out in the future, and also will be a foothold for the future U.S. armies in or out. So now there's another stakeholder now coming, join the game. So that's why the Taliban, they often even bombed Taliban forces with those drones offered by the Turkey army. So that's why Taliban, I think, now make the second thought, thinking about now maybe we also need to talk, to reach some good deal, beneficial for themselves.
Mr. Mahoney, I want to follow up on that because obviously the departure of the U.S. troops will leave a kind of a vacuum of power in that country. As Ms. He just mentioned, Turkey wants to be playing a part, and Russia probably also has some plans. Do you believe the situation may lead those powers to get more involved in Afghanistan in some way?
I think it's inevitable. If we see a continuation of civil war and instability and potentially spillover effects of militancy, if not terror, then you have a number of countries that are going to be facing pressure to be involved. They include India, Pakistan, Turkey, China, Russia. And I think, quite honestly, I think that we should be suspicious of the U.S. almost intentionally leaving a mess. In other words, the U.S. strategic interests have shifted so much that it's almost willing or desired in Washington to leave a mess for these other countries, particularly China and Pakistan, if not Russia, in order to pass, the dirty buck in a sense.
But do you think China, Pakistan, and all the other countries Mr. Mahoney mentioned will take the bait? What will China and Pakistan and the neighboring countries do? Will it be a constructive role for them?
Actually, the United States even want to set up another base in Pakistan. They have negotiated this with Pakistan, but Pakistan has been denying this immediately, saying there's no room at all for settle down another U.S. base in Pakistan. So actually, China, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, we had a foreign ministers meeting not long ago. So our foreign minister Wang Yi has made very clear, we would like even to talk about how to extend this One Belt, One Road initiative all the way extended to Afghanistan. Before we have been doing many, many years for this China-Pakistan corridor, economic corridor. So now we would like to extend this all the way to Afghanistan.
But considering the fractured politics now in Afghanistan, do you think that might be some risks involved if China is too invested in its Belt and Road initiative?
Yeah, of course, now it's not the time. It's not a good time at all. I'm talking before this, all this chaos coming out, similarly like a civil war. So before we even talk about this, we would like to do that. But now, because this seems like a civil war broke out and lots of fighting, definitely is not a good time now to do further investment there. But we have been doing something like economic construction. We even had been offering training, for Afghanistan's police, this kind of security forces. Before we have been offering this kind of help. So anyway, I think being in the neighboring country, either Pakistan or China, we would like to offer a negotiation table anyway. If both sides would like come over to China to talk, yeah, we would like to offer. And also like economic, those construction projects, yeah, of course, after things settle down.
Okay.
Yeah, because those are the basics, yeah, for offering people jobs.
Mr. Rahim, the problem is, will it settle down or will it descend into civil wars? What is your reading of Taliban? Is Taliban today still the Taliban in the 1990s that blow up Buddha statues and keeping women from going to schools and everything that is in the minds of a lot of people? Has it evolved?
You know, you look at the Taliban, they have been always on the fringes. They have been in the rural areas. They have been on the battlefield. For the change to happen or the evolution to happen, you need the people to be part of the mainstream business of the governance, which they have not been. Secondly, the reports that are coming out from the areas where they have dominated for a month or so now, from there you see they're again imposing the rules and regulations they exercised during the 90s. Thirdly, some of the videos and visuals coming out from those districts that they have taken over. Again, you see that a building was blown up, a district office, governor's office was blown up in the western part of Afghanistan. In the north, in one of the districts, when the Taliban fighters entered, they just destroyed the whole administrative arrangement. The files were thrown around and everything like that. This gives you a sense that at least at the foot soldier level and mid fighters level, nothing has changed, and don't expect that to change. And mainly because these guys have been on the battlefield. So when did they have a chance to really make a change or make a transformation? Nothing much has changed in that regard.
What about economically? Do they think differently economically? How is their discipline and morale?
You know, right now, when you talk about morale, you have to detach it from the economic discussion. Morale is that since the signing of the Doha Agreement, the leadership of the Taliban sent a message across to their foot soldiers and mid-level commanders that, see, we have been able to eliminate the Americans, we have been able to defeat another superpower in Afghanistan, and euphoria was created among the fighters, believing that, well, the conquest is just around the corner, we're going to march into Kabul as conquerors, and that sense of conquest, the sense of victory has created a sort of understanding among the Taliban that the fighters, the mid-level commanders, they don't believe in discussion. They say, well, we have ousted the Americans. Why cannot we do the same with the current Afghan state and the administration? That kind of feeling is going to challenge the political settlement. We can come back to the discussion on economics later on if you want it.
Mr. Mahoney, probably the Talibans are pretty confident about the future, but do you think they are on the winning side? Probably they've been successful being insurgents, but can they be successful being the runners of the country?
You know, that's a very good question. I think, again, the general perception, at least from what we're seeing in the reporting in the West, is that the Taliban are making substantial gains, and it's become something of a popular pundit parlor game to predict when the U.S. will abandon its diplomatic mission in Kabul and when Kabul will collapse. I hope that doesn't happen, but nevertheless, it's something that's talked about with more frequency here. But as to whether or not the Taliban would be able to continue, if it did take power, whether or not be able to consolidate its position and rule effectively, or whether it would face its own counterinsurgency, whether it would face other forms of foreign intervention, whether it would face some sort of popular resistance to its hardline fundamentalist policies. All of these are very strong, all of these are very clearly possibilities should they win power.
And there's a relevant question is, how will they handle the other half of the country, which is left behind by the Americans, Mr. Mahoney? One particular group probably is the local translators, the contractors of the Afghans. It's the case that people who offer assistance to foreign military are targeted or to be killed after the withdrawal of the Americans. It has been reported many of those people are having trouble getting visas into the U.S. They are left on their own. The U.S. have let them.
Yeah, this is being presented in U.S. media as a scandal, and deservedly so. And it's not just right that these close comrades of U.S. forces are being abandoned. It's also the broader narrative that the Afghan people and especially Afghan women are being abandoned to an uncertain fate. But you know, the fact is, this type of problem is nothing new. We saw this in other historical conflicts. We saw it, for example,
because
as the US
America
came out
have
of
launched
Vietnam.
many wars in history.
Some people managed. Right. And the fact of the matter is, you know, these translators, they're not just individuals. They belong to networks. They belong to families. They're a large group of people. And I think it's very difficult and politically sensitive even for the U.S. to recognize, evacuate, and resettle all of these people in a responsible way. And, you know, I think some will get out, some will get visas, some will get out of their own accord. But unfortunately, many will be left to a difficult future.
But Biden has said that a military withdrawal does not mean giving up Afghanistan. What kind of resources can America offer to the Afghans?
Well, I think, you know, the U.S. has promised what they call over-the-horizon and diplomatic and political support, but it's not really clear what that means precisely. Now, we know that the U.S. might be continuing to support Afghan forces currently with airstrikes, but whether or not that will persist remains to be seen. You know, while a Kabul collapse or a extended civil war, or even Taliban victory, would be very costly politically for Biden at home and abroad, it's not clear that the U.S. really cares at this point or that it has the will or ability to stop those developments if they come. And again, as I suggested earlier, some suspect the U.S. Really wants to leave a mess and to complicate matters regionally, especially for China and Pakistan.
Mr. Rahim, what about the Afghan people? Are they going to be better off because the Americans have left, or worse off because they will live without the support from the Americans?
Well, it highly depends on what's the outcome of the political process that is halted right now, which is static right now, not moving forward. If the Americans join hands with the regional countries and its partners globally and try to push for a political settlement, for a peace process to succeed, I think that will be better off, because the militant group had the pretext for their fighting the Americans' presence, and the Americans have left, which means there is no reason for fighting. But then they have not been able to reconcile with the state government. Now, if that happens, I think the Afghans will have a chance to go into a situation where there will be no reason for fighting for any of the groups. There will definitely be a political tussle for taking power through the democratic processes, but then you won't have violence for the conflict to settle. That's one scenario. Another scenario is where you have the regional countries. Earlier you talked about Pakistan. You know, don't undermine the fact that the Pakistan have been offering sanctuaries to the Taliban, and they continue to push for a client government in Kabul. And if that is not curtailed, the international community, including United Nations, they don't come forward and support the peace process in Afghanistan. So one day Taliban are having an upper hand, another day government goes forward and takes areas. The continuation of violence is certainly going to challenge the stability of the country. And instability is definitely going to challenge the broader regional agenda of the countries who are looking forward to this new era, the century of the East, where they're looking forward to have development. That is going to be challenged by the insecurity and instability of Afghanistan, because the militancy and instability and conflict in 21st century does not remain contained and curtailed to certain boundaries. So we have two scenarios that the Afghan communities and people are facing. The hope is that the international community will recognize its role, will come forward and try to put pressure on the proxy, the spoiler elements, and make sure that the Taliban and the Afghan government are back to the negotiation table, and there is some sort of political settlement.
Why it still sounds that the Afghan people still rely on the international community, but what about their own domestic situation? Can they rely on themselves to have a functioning and dependable government? Ms. He?
Yeah, because
they can.
Ms. He, please.
Yeah, I think the thing is because themselves now are fighting. Yeah, one is in control this part, and another one is control another part. So it's very hard to find something they can agree upon nowadays. As long as one side they think they have this kind of power and strength, they can occupy all the country, so they will fight until.
But do you believe they will have the political vision for the longer term future of Afghan and settle?
Yeah, of course. This from the people, all the people. They don't like any war. They want the peace. They want stability. I think this is no doubt about that. But the key issue is those decision makers themselves, like Taliban, those high level, those commanders. Yeah, they think they now have the strength, have the capacity. They have the upper hand. So when they have the upper hand, they want to occupy the more space, and then they will. Again, even though they will reach some some joint government, and then if they occupy more space, of course they will get more minister, those positions. Yeah, that's the general thinking
the politics
coming from those.
Will probably stay there. Mr. Mahoney,
can I
yes,
can I
Mr.
a
Rahim?
couple of sentences?
Yes.
Yeah,
Mr. Rahim.
quickly. You talked about the capacity of the Afghans. I can assure you that the Afghan community does have the capacity of solving their conflict. We have a long history of traditional mechanism for conflict management in this country and taking the country forward towards prosperity. But then when I talk about the international community support and regional country support, the main reason is that there are so many of these spoiler elements, the states which are interfering in Afghan affairs, not allowing the things to settle down the way Afghans want it. So that's why when I say
that's a very important
they have the
perspective. Well, 1 minute left to Mr. Mahoney. The historic perspective. It is 20 years since the U.S. launched a war in Afghanistan. And reviewing the past 20 years in totality, how would you characterize Americans' involvement?
Well, I think there are two main points. The first is when the U.S. got involved in Afghanistan, it was really to respond to the Soviets entering there and working with Pakistan to build the madrasas and to train the Taliban in the first place. That eventually led to the blowback that we saw in part in 9/11. So there's always been sort of this misguided effort of cause and effect related in these conflicts. Now, some will argue that the U.S. Has achieved its objectives. It punished the Taliban. It decimated al-Qaeda to the extent that it can't launch attacks from Afghanistan anymore globally. But at the same time, many point to what they believe to be failed efforts for state and nation building, not a very secure military or the local capacity to ensure peace and development. And a common view is that America's failures in Afghanistan, but also Iraq, Libya, and Syria, are all indices of an American decline as a global hegemon. And I think that this assessment is generally fair, and I think for a long time we will bear the responsibility of the mess in Afghanistan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mahoney, Mr. Rahim, Ms. He. Probably history has its own verdict. And that will do it for this edition of Dialogue. I'm Zhou Yue in Beijing. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.